students, I've got something for you to consider, and I imagine once I get going that you'll just immediately know what I'm talking about. Okay, so here it goes. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Right? You know. This is one of the most familiar lines of one of the most familiar stories in all of the Bible. Just humor me. Any ideas what it is? Did you catch any of those words? No? Okay. Well, it's this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's the very first line in the very first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:1. Now, some people think that a better way to translate this line from Hebrew to English is when God began to create heaven and earth. It's a minor difference, I know, but in the first translation, the most common translation, it seems to imply that before God creates anything, that there was nothing there. It's like God is in a void, and then God snaps God's fingers and stuff just starts to show up. And you want to learn some Latin? I assume you do. Who doesn't? The idea of God creating something out of nothing, or everything out of nothing. It's called creation ex nihilo. And this concept, it does appear in the Bible, just not here, not in Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, God has some stuff to work with when God is creating. In fact, it says that the earth was formless and void. Void means empty. One more Hebrew phrase, because it's really fun to say. In Hebrew, this idea of the earth being formless and void, it sounds like this. The earth was tohu vavohu. Oh, that's fun to say. Tohu vavohu. I love that. Now the story goes on to say that darkness was over the deep. That's going to be important in a moment, so hold on to that. And that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, God never snapped God's fingers to get this formless blob of earth or to get water everywhere. In the story, it was already there and earth was already formless. And I want to think about this with you for a minute. Specifically, I want to think about this idea of water, the primordial waters that just were. Okay, so some of you might know how this story unfolds. In Genesis 1, the author tells the story of the first 6 days of creation, 7 if you want to get technical. In day 1, remember, God says, "Let there be light." And you could think from this that God is sort of conjuring up light out of nowhere. It says, and there was light after God had spoken it into existence, and God separates it from the darkness. The darkness, note, is not brought into existence, it just was. Now, check out day 2. God says, "Let there be a vault in the midst of the waters." So a vault is showing up, and it's in the midst of the waters that just were, and it's meant to divide the water from water. This is a lot of the use of the term water. It's sort of confusing. Now let's think about this. A vault, it's a weird word. It's like a ceiling or a roof, or where some of you are from, a roof. Think about when it rains. It's been raining a lot lately. I don't know if you've been experiencing this, but here it's been raining a ton. Our yard is still soppy with a bunch of water. The water falls from the sky and it hits your roof, and it doesn't get into your house, hopefully. Your roof is like a vault. It's a separator. It's a protector. It keeps you and your family and all of your stuff dry. You do not want a bunch of water falling onto your video games, right? Or maybe better, to think about this idea of God creating a vault, think about a snow globe. You know how a snow globe is filled with water, and when you shake it up, all the sparkly stuff that kind of looks like snow, it falls. Like it's a glass ball that's filled with water that has some stuff in it. The glass around the snow globe is the vault. It keeps stuff out. You can kind of tap on it from the outside of it. Now, in Genesis, the picture is a little bit different. God is separating the water inside the snow globe from the water outside of the snow globe. It's almost like taking a snow globe and then putting it in the deep end of a pool. The water from the pool, it doesn't get into the snow globe because it has a vault or a roof. Why am I telling you all this? Well, first of all, because it's awesome, okay? That's the first reason. It's such a crazy picture of the world, a snow globe inside of a pool, and that leads to the second reason. When you read these old stories, sometimes you miss stuff because how they talk about the world isn't how we talk about the world. Does the earth have a vault? Does it have a ceiling? If you got into a rocket ship and just blasted off and just flew straight up, would you at any point run into a big ceiling? Of course not. That's preposterous. But ancient people, in their story of creation, there was something up there that kept the water from the pool, so to speak, out of their world. Now, you might also be wondering about what it would be like to live inside of a snow globe. I mean, it's filled with water too, right? So you would definitely need some scuba gear. Well, good news. On day 3 of creation, God took all of the water inside of the snow globe and gathered it together in an ocean or a sea. So you have dry land and then you have this body of water, kind of like today. But still, this is a weird picture of the world. And we know it's not how the world really is. We aren't in a snow globe in a pool. There's no ceiling above us and there's no water outside of the ceiling. We aren't floating in the deep end of our pools. So why did ancient people talk like this? Well, ancient people didn't have telescopes or spaceships. They looked up, they saw a blue sky, and they thought, maybe there's some water up there. And then when it rains, maybe somehow that water from up there is getting down here. Maybe. But more importantly, in the ancient world, these stories about how the world was, they were important, and they taught people lessons. In the ancient world, water represented something pretty scary. Later on in Genesis, it says that God creates the sea monsters. And we're not talking about whales and sharks. This is kind of like a term for dragons. This is stuff that doesn't really exist. But in the Bible, it says that God is creating these sea monsters and that they live in the water. Also, remember when I said that darkness was over the deep in the second verse of Genesis? That phrase, the deep, it was super scary for ancient people. It represented a form of chaos. Does that word mean something to you? It's like things that are out of control. The deep was something that was just doing its own thing. You couldn't control it in the ancient mind. It was like a wild animal and it could kill you. But in this story, God's Spirit is hovering over the waters of the deep, and God is making a barrier or a vault or a ceiling or a roof to keep the waters out. And God is making the water go into one spot in the ocean, and God is creating the scary sea monsters and telling them where they could live. God is controlling all of the scary stuff. God is telling them where to go and how to act and what they can and can't do. God is forming a place that is safe. Do you see? This ancient picture of the world, it's not an accurate picture of the world according to telescopes and spaceships and satellites. We have no ceiling above us. Your rocket ship, if you ever get into one, will not crash into a big roof in the sky. But what the story is saying to us is very true. God is in control, even of the wild things. God tames the chaos. God creates and names and places the sea monsters in the water like pets. God controls the scary stuff. Now, sometimes when I get scared, I remind myself of this story. When it seems like everything around is just chaotic, it's just out of control, this ancient story reminds me that God is still hovering over the waters, that God is still making sure that the deep does not invade into our space. It's telling us that God is in control. So maybe when you get scared, when life feels hard, when it seems like sea monsters are coming after you, maybe try thinking of this ancient picture of God and praying to the God who can tame chaos.